Hello, my name is Jerica Vergara. For my field trip, I decided to visit Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge on Sanibel Island. I chose this specific location because I've heard of it in the past and I thought this would be a good opportunity to finally go and visit. This is a picture of me and my son. The most significant concept that I learned while visiting Ding Darling was surrounding the mangrove tree. Iconic Florida birds such as the great blue heron use mangroves as a place to raise their young. They nest in the leaves, and since they stand apart from the mainland, they're pretty safe for their young to grow. They also provide a great source of food as fish and other sea life raise their young at the base of the mangrove. One of the most interesting things that I learned about the mangrove was how the mangroves cope with salts. They filter about 90% of the salt out of their roots, but some of the salt left in their system they rid themselves of by sacrificing leaves on their tree. So these pen-like pods are the seeds of the mangrove tree. They float on the ocean until they find a place where they can root and become a new mangrove tree. While on my tour of the refuge, I was lucky enough to actually find a pod that looked to have rooted itself to the ground. I was also able to find an example of the next stage of the life cycle of a mangrove tree. These pods and saplings grow into a mangrove forest, pictured here. This is from the refuge, and I thought it was a very good example of what a mangrove forest would look like. Mangrove trees are the perfect example of a prime producer. Their leaves drop off the trees and create food for different bacteria, which in turn feed the fish that hide amongst their roots. These fish feed the birds that nest in their leaves, and it's just a full cycle. They extract salts through their roots and through their leaves as well, and provide protection to the Florida coast. One of the animals that takes advantage of the mangrove tree habitat is this little guy right here. This is a Florida mud crab found all throughout the Gulf of Mexico. I was lucky enough to find this little guy and chose him as my prime consumer. The mud crab has a couple of unique features to help it live in its environment. It has a tough exoskeleton which protects against predators and keeps its body stable. It also has two claws in the front, which help with feeding itself and defending against predators as well. Its legs are flat to allow for swimming in the ocean. While these are predominantly sea creatures, they can be found on land. You can also find fish swimming around the mangrove forest. Feeding on these fish and crabs are some white ibises that flock around the base of the mangrove, collecting food and shading themselves from the sun. I also spotted a blue heron out here sunning himself, looking for his next catch. This definitely changed my perception of this environment. I was able to find so many different creatures in just this small space. Much of this class has been centered around the damage that us humans do to the oceans. I saw a couple of things at the refuge that really brought this home to me. In particular, this exhibit on the leatherback sea turtle. It's a wire structure filled with different kinds of trash. The sculpture really brought home a lot of the ideas that we've talked about in the class and was a really good metaphor for what we're doing to our oceans. Yes, this trash ends up in the ocean and ends up in the bellies of the animals that we love.